American forces are ready to launch strikes on Syria if President Barack Obama chooses to order an attack, U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel says. We have moved assets in place to be able to fulfill and comply with whatever option the president wishes to take, Mr. Hagel told the BBC. The White House said the U.S. would release intelligence on last week's suspected attack in the next few days. The UK Parliament is to be recalled on Thursday to discuss possible responses. Prime Minister David Cameron said the world could not stand idly by after seeing appalling scenes of death and suffering caused by suspected chemical weapons attacks. The crisis follows last Wednesday's suspected chemical attack near the Syrian capital, Damascus, which reportedly killed more than 300 people. French President Francois Hollande said France was ready to punish whoever was behind the attack, and had decided to increase military support for Syria's main opposition. BBC diplomatic correspondent James Robbins says the US, UK and France will now have the larger task of building as wide a coalition as possible to support limited military action. Meanwhile, the Arab League said it held Syrian President Bashar al-Assad responsible for the attacks and called for UN action. Syrian opposition sources have said they have been told to expect a Western intervention in the conflict imminently. There is no precise timing, but one can speak of an imminent international intervention against the regime. It's a question of days and not weeks, AFP news agency quoted Syrian National Coalition official Ahmad Ramadan as saying. There have been meetings between the coalition, the rebel, Free Syrian Army and allied countries during which possible targets have been discussed. Russia and China, allies of the Syrian government, have stepped up their warnings against military intervention, with Moscow saying any such action would have catastrophic consequences for the region. Syrian Foreign Minister Walid Muallim has said he rejects utterly and completely claims that Syrian forces used chemical weapons, and his government has blamed rebel fighters. On Monday, United Nations weapons inspectors were fired on while investigating one of the 5 alleged chemical weapons attack sites around Damascus. We are prepared, Mr. Hagel said. The U.S. Department of Defense had provided President Obama with all options for all contingencies. He has seen them. We are prepared, he told the BBC's John Sopel, adding, we are ready to go. Mr. Hagel said that intelligence currently being gathered by the UN inspectors would confirm that the Syrian government was responsible for the chemical attack last week. I think it's pretty clear that chemical weapons were used against people in Syria, he said. Our correspondent says he left little doubt that he believed the Assad government was responsible, and was ready to execute the orders of his commander-in-chief. White House spokesman Jay Carney later said that a separate report on chemical weapons use being compiled by the U.S. intelligence community would be published this week. Mr. Carney said that Mr. Obama had a variety of options and was not limited to the use of force, adding that it was not Washington's intention to remove Mr. Assad. The options we are considering are not about regime change, he said. Meanwhile, warnings have been issued on sites linked to Islamic militants fighting for the rebels in Syria, saying that their leaders and training camps might also be targeted by a possible US-led attack, says BBC Arab Affairs editor Sebastian Usher. Several online sites linked to the Newsfront and similar groups have advised militants not to hold meetings or gather in large numbers, and to change routines and locations. He says, Western powers have made clear their distrust and dislike of groups like the Newsfront, which have spearheaded rebel victories, although there has been no indication from the US or anyone else that jihadists would be targeted. He adds, the UN says more than 100,000 people have been killed since the uprising against President Assad began more than 2 years ago. The conflict has produced more than 1.7 million registered refugees,